Jasmine and I joined the Sea Scout ship Steeves, a 65-foot steel trawler, to go out on a rainy day out of Santa Cruz. We started that trip by turning the boat around in fairly tight quarters, and you can see some of the sediment in the harbor being churned up in that maneuver. We spun the boat by engaging the starboard motor in forward and the port motor in reverse, and that spun the vessel around in a fairly narrow channel. It's quite impressive how it turned on a dime. And then we set off down the Santa Cruz Upper Harbor Channel towards the bridge, the Murray Street Bridge, which you can see overhead now. And we had to time the departure of the vessel so that the tide was low enough that the top of the vessel wouldn't hit the bridge, and also that the tide wasn't too low because there was some sediment deposited in the bottom of the harbor from the winter storms, and we had to sort of thread a needle by having the tide just right. It was a rainy day and kind of cold, but other than that, it was an enjoyable experience to go out on the Steeves. We're passing some of the other boats in the Santa Cruz Harbor, in the lower harbor. You can see that the boats are the bigger boats. That's Heartbeat that we've just passed, and there's some of the crew, smiling crew members. And you can see it's a grey day. Santa Cruz still looks quite pretty in the grey weather, and the harbour has about 700 boats in it. It's one of the bigger boats, Kodiak I believe it's called, a big fishing vessel. The Steeves is a boat that was built in Australia and was used to run drugs to America. It was confiscated by the US Coast Guard and subsequently sold, and it became a Sea Scout vessel. This is the view of the Seabright Beach, and that's the view of the lighthouse at Santa Cruz Harbor. Seabright Beach is the beach that Jasmine and I walk up and down almost every day. Now we're seeing the beginning of the pier in Santa Cruz. This is a pier that stretches out for about half a mile, and it was built about 100 years ago in order to load gunpowder onto boats. You might notice a few seals and sea lions resting on the trestles of the pier. This long pier is historic to Santa Cruz because Santa Cruz historically was a location where gunpowder was manufactured. There's a lot of trees on the Santa Cruz mountains, and they were burnt in order to generate charcoal, and then mixed with lime or whatever the other components of gunpowder are, and then the barrels of gunpowder were carried down the long pier to vessels, sailing vessels waiting to ferry them to San Francisco. This operation was considered a little too dangerous to be done in San Francisco, so Santa Cruz at the time was a very much a backwater community 100 years ago and had all the trees necessary. So that's part of Santa Cruz's history as manufacture of gunpowder, and it was loaded on this big pier. Once the gunpowder industry vanished, then the pier was used for restaurants. Notice how the flag on the vessel is fairly limp as we are traveling slowly down the length of the pier, currently traveling at about 3 knots, and you can occasionally hear the very low whine of the engine. Later we accelerate to full speed, which is about 10 knots for this vessel, 10-11 knots, and that's at about 1,800 revs per minute on 2 large diesel engines. and then you'll notice a flag flying straight backwards. Now we're looking at the beach called Cowles Beach, and that's one of the few hotels in Santa Cruz. Cowles is famous as a longboarding spot for beginners, and as we look up the length of the beach, which we'll show shortly, we're looking towards Steamer's Lane, the famous surfing spot in Santa Cruz. It's called Steamer's Lane because steamships that came to collect gunpowder were queued up in a line, and we're looking at Steamer's Lane now, and that's a lighthouse at the end of Steamer's Lane. And then big waves would break there and produce a lot of what looked like steam. Now you can just hear the engine revving up if you're, and I'm looking over the stern now and you see the cavitation of the water. The propellers move in opposite directions to each other, and you can notice that in the water of the wake that we're producing. Now the flag is flying straight backwards and we're headed home. It was calling me in, and we got back to the dock safely, and we had a great trip.